Well, I do believe that has something to do with our environment and our perception of our environment. If you're in an environment where your mom says, now do this and don't do that, and it's extremely black and white, and you'll be punished if you don't and rewarded if you do, you can get external motivation distract you from your authentic intrinsic drives. And so your whole life is trying to please somebody that's an authority and not want to upset people. And so you'll conform and fit into whoever the authority leadership is, and you'll end up spending your life trying to fit in instead of stand out. Even though your innate yearning is to stand out and be different. And some people don't have that. They become the rebels as a child, and they defy things like that. And they're bad kids. They're labeled bad kids in the beginning, the misfits. But they are courageous enough to go after what they want. And so, as the famous Steve Jobs statement in things about the misfits, it's the misfits that change the world. The rest of them are conformists. They fit in. You're either conformity and following other cultures, or you're in enormity building a new culture. I chose when I was very young, I wanted to build a culture, not follow a culture. And so I set out to walk on the path of, individuality. As Ernest Becker in his Denial of Death text, he talks about there's a collective and an individual path for immortality. And those that fit in and conform are on the collective, the social. And those that are doing something that leaves the mark, they may be ridiculed, violently opposed initially, but eventually they make something that changes the world. And I wanted to go on that path. And that means you have to be willing to let people not understand you. Emerson said to be great is to be misunderstood. I'd like to share an interesting story about that, a fun story.
I'd love to hear it.
When I was 18, I was going to Wharton Junior College in Texas. And I carpooled with this other gentleman who was an engineer, a young 18-year-old guy that wanted to be an engineer. His dream was to build magnetic trains, which, by the way, he went on to do. The magnetic trains that exist today are partly his invention.
Wow.
I had a dream to travel the world and be a teacher. I wanted to be like that gentleman that inspired me, to inspire people around the world to fulfill their dreams and do something extraordinary with their life. And I wanted to teach and research everything I could on every field possible for that objective. Well, one day we had a gentleman, a young man who was about 19, who was the son of a very wealthy family, a bit on the arrogant side, sitting in the back seat, carpooling. And we were talking about our dreams, and he was in the back seat laughing. And he said, yeah, sure, John, you're going to do this, you're going to do that. Look, and he knew me when I was high school dropout. He knew, I had learning problems and speech problems and stuff. And said, sure, yeah, man, you're going to work in the cotton gin. Come on, you live in a small town. These people have fantasies. And he just really rained on our parade and degraded everything we were saying. And we looked at each other, the engineer and I, and we said, whoa, I don't think we're going to take him on this trip anymore. So we didn't let him carpool. Mainly because we probably had insecurities about how we were going to accomplish it at the time, and we didn't like that resistance. And that was in 1973. Well, 2 years and a little bit, about 2 years and 3 or 4 months ago, I was doing a program online. I think we had about 8,000 people listening. And I have a director in South Africa that received some sort of blog announcement on the chat. And there's a guy that says, is that the John Demartini from Richmond, Texas? Now, the only person that would ask that is somebody that obviously knew me back then or whatever. And so when she said, did you live in Richmond, Texas? Because most people thought I lived in Houston, which is nearby. And I said, yeah, find out who it is. Because if he knows I lived in Richmond, I'd like to know who it is. And so I said, find out who it is and say, yes, I'm from Richmond. And so she sent back and says, yes, he lived in Richmond, Texas. And so the guy then said, this is so-and-so. And it was the guy that was in the back seat. And he said, this is so-and-so. And I said, wow, I haven't heard from you since 1973. How you doing? What you doing? I typed that in and sent it back to him. And then he sent back a message. He He said, "You friggin' did it, man."
Wow. That had to be a very surreal
I got
moment.
a tear in my eye because, many times people won't understand your vision because it doesn't support theirs. They want to bring you into their world and project their values onto you. But when he said you friggin' did it, what he really said is you never gave up. If you don't give up on something and you stay with something, which is a sign of something congruent and deeply meaningful, then eventually the people at the top die out. You end up at the top. You just got to stay with it. If I live long enough, I'll be probably at the top of my field. Nobody else is there long enough. So, but what he was really saying is that I judged you back when you were 18. I ridiculed you. I criticized you. I didn't believe in you. But right now, I'm inspired and I do. So, congratulations. You just inspired me to look at my own life and to make sure I'm doing what I set out to do.
I think, first off, that is a incredible story. I'm feeling very inspired right now, and it makes me think about how a lot of us don't think big enough. A lot of us have that big vision inside of us, but there's this sense of, well, yeah, but, or I don't know. What advice would you have around that for people that have that kind of inner knowing that there's a bigger, grander vision that they have, but they're not yet fully embracing it?
Anytime you take an action that is aligned and congruent with what you value most, you increase the probability of achieving it because you're disciplined, reliable, and focused in your highest value. Anytime you set a goal that is lower on your hierarchy of values, you procrastinate, hesitate, and frustrate, and decrease the probability of achieving it. When you decrease the probability of achieving something, you shrink the space and time horizons and search for immediate gratification to compensate for the unfulfillment. So you wake up your amygdala looking for an impulse. And so compulsive, impulsive, immediate gratifying, addictive behaviors and debaucherous lifestyles and consumer lifestyles as a compensation for unfulfilled highest values. But the second you go after what's highest on your value and stick to priority, delegating other things and sticking to the highest priority thing where you're doing what you love, you can't wait to get up and do it, where people can't wait to get that service, you automatically want to achieve more the second you achieve and accomplish what you set out to. So your space and time horizons expand. And they keep expanding until they get beyond your own age and your own life. And you build legacies and momentum. And so congruency offers you a feedback of a progressively ever expanding view of what you're capable of doing on planet Earth and beyond. So it's congruency. We were rewarded with, when we're congruent, we're rewarded with an expanded vision, an expanded strategy, and an expanded influence. It was Seneca, the Roman poet and philosopher, who said, you measure an individual by their most distant ends. And the magnitude of space and time within our innermost dominant thought will determine the level of conscious evolution we attain. So how big of space and time horizons do we have? If we look at Elon Musk, he has century objectives. You look at Richard Branson, he has at least decades to century. The people that have the broader space and time horizons are the people that do the greatest things because they automatically see humanity on a greater level. And so the question is how big a challenge are you willing to pursue? So if you don't fill your day with challenges that inspire you, it's going to fill up with challenges that don't. And it's better to go after a challenge that you want to tackle, that you're inspired to solve, and go out and do something that makes the biggest difference. And the greater the number of people we're able to make a difference on, the greater the life potential we have. So that's the question. And instead of how do I avoid challenges, what are the greatest challenges that I can solve on planet Earth? Bill Gates, one of the questions I remember reading in an article that he asked himself daily is, what is the greatest challenge? What's the highest priority challenge that I could solve today in the most efficient, effective manners with the resources that I have available? That's a great question. So he'll look and he'll go, okay, what's the biggest problem in the world? Okay, hunger. What's another big problem? Lack of water. What's another big problem? Dying of certain diseases. So whatever the biggest problems are, you target that and you find out what is being done on that and how do you do it more effectively and efficiently. And you end up making a massive difference if you target something like that. But most people don't give themselves permission to think outside their own physical selves. Of course, they get trapped in their physical limitations.